I burned my hair off to save Jackson. At the betrothal banquet, his childhood friend Clara publicly ripped off my wig. She laughed coquettishly and said, "Sophia's hair is what stood between Jackson and disaster, everyone should have a look." Gasps and whispered gossip rippled through the assembled guests. The children made ugly faces and cursed at me, calling me the grotesque monster from Ultraman. Even my future mother-in-law said I was a toad trying to eat swan meat. I looked toward Jackson's, but he merely held his wineglass, his expression indifferent. Sophia is kind and won't bother to argue with them. I was dazed and ruined, walked to the rooftop and jumped down. I opened my eyes, I had returned to the hour before saving Jackson's. "Sophia, Jackson's in trouble," Clara cried. "The warehouse in the west of the city is on fire. He ran in to get the files and hasn't come out." "Oh," I replied calmly. "Oh? Sophia, what kind of reaction is that? That's your fiancé." Clara's voice rose. I smiled lightly and walked to the wardrobe to pack. Why should I worry about someone who won't die? In my last life, I barreled into the fire like a madwoman. My wet coat shielded him, my back and hair were completely burned off. My face was unrecognizable, and I lay in the hospital for 3 months. Jackson's only came to see me once. He brought Clara. His brow was tight. "Sophia, why did you act so rashly?" "The paperwork isn't important." Clara hid behind him, timid. "Sophia, I'm sorry, it's all my fault." At the engagement banquet, Clara tore my wig off with her own hands. My bare scalp was exposed in front of the guests. My mother-in-law Victoria spat at me, "A toad. The G family can't afford to have someone like you. Even the children call me a monster." Jackson's lifted his glass, expression indifferent. "Sophia is kind, she won't hold grudges." "Yes, I'm kind. So kind I jumped from the 20th floor." "Sophia, are you listening to me? If you don't go, Jackson will be dead." Clara screamed. I folded the last piece of clothing and zipped up the suitcase. "Clara," I cut her off, "if you're so worried, why don't you go save him yourself?" Silence on the other end of the line. I can picture her stunned, resentful expression. I'm just a delicate woman, how could I go into a burning building?" She began that act again. "Weak woman, shut up." I hung up. Blocked her. Blocked Jackson's. The world fell quiet. I pulled my suitcase, feeling not an ounce of regret. I walked out of the villa we'd shared for 3 years. Downstairs, a black Bentley idled. A face, chiseled and impassive. Damien. Jackson's business nemesis. In my last life, I'd only seen him on financial news. He looked at me, then at the suitcase. His thin lips parted slightly. "Running away from home?" "Just a breakup," I answered lightly. He raised an eyebrow, somewhat surprised. "Where are you going?" "I'll give you a lift." "Anywhere. As long as it's not here." The driver got out and helped me with the luggage. The car smoothly merged onto the highway. The in-car radio was broadcasting the news. A major fire broke out at Qingxi Hongyuan warehouse, the blaze is fierce, casualties unknown. Mr. Jackson's, CEO of the G family, is inside the warehouse. I turned my head to look out the window. The street scene rushed backward. In my previous life, Jackson's was rescued by me, inhaled the smoke, and rested for a week. This life, without me. What will become of him? I tilted the corner of my mouth into a smile. Damien suddenly spoke, "You seem very happy?" I looked back and met his inquisitive gaze. "Yeah," I admitted freely. "My ex might be burned to death, doesn't that make me happy?" Damien looked at me intently. He said nothing. The car stopped at the entrance of a 5-star hotel. Damien handed me a room card, "Check in first. If you need anything, call this number." A business card, only a string of numbers. Why help me? Because Jackson's rubbed me the wrong way. He answered as if it were obvious, The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I accepted that reason. I took the room card and walked into the lobby. The first thing I did was run a hot bath. In the rising steam, my reflection in the mirror, skin flawless. A mane of glossy black hair. As if transported to another life. How wonderful. There was still time. I soaked for a long time. My phone began to vibrate like crazy. I picked up. Jackson's mother's hysterical voice. Sophia. Where on earth have you been? Jackson ran into the fire for you, his life is unknown, you jinx. I frowned. For me? In my last life he clearly said it was for the documents. Aunt, you've got it wrong. We broke up. His safety has nothing to do with me. You heartless thing. The G family really have no eyes. If anything happens to Jackson, I will never let you off. She cursed like a madwoman. I hung up immediately. I slipped into a robe and poured a glass of red wine. Downstairs the traffic flowed and neon flashed. This is what life is. Not a sickbed, watching myself rot day after day. The next morning the doorbell woke me. I opened the door. Jackson stood there unharmed. His face was pale. The whites of his eyes were rimmed with red. The way he looked at me was as if he wanted to eat me alive. Behind him, Clara was crying so her mascara ran like willow blossoms. His mother-in-law wore a face of pure fury. Sophia, you really have nerve. My mother-in-law launched the first attack. She slapped at me. I turned my body and dodged. She missed and nearly fell. Jackson steadied her. You actually dodged. My mother-in-law trembled with rage. I looked at her coldly. On what grounds do you have the right to hit me? On what grounds? On the grounds that you almost got my son killed in a fire. Did I force him to go into the fire? I shot back. My mother-in-law was left speechless. Jackson finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Sophia, why didn't you answer the phone? I didn't want to. I leaned against the doorframe, languid. Do you know how worried I was? I thought something happened to you. He stepped forward, trying to grab my hand. I took a step back, dodging him. Worried about me? Shouldn't you be out in the blaze, waiting for me to save you? The air hardened. Jackson stared at me, trying to find a crack in my face. Behind him, mother-in-law and Clara clearly didn't grasp the situation. Jackson, why are you wasting words on her? A cold, heartless woman like that doesn't deserve you. Mother-in-law kept shouting. Clara spoke softly, Jackson, don't be angry. Sophia might be confused for a moment. She tugged at Jackson's arm as she spoke, an intimate air about her. In my past life I couldn't stand that look and quarreled over it, only to be blamed by Jackson's for being childish. Now I only found it laughable. Jackson's, I broke the silence, since you're fine, take your mother and your childhood sweetheart and disappear from before my eyes. I don't want to see you again. Sophia. Jackson's voice was urgent. Let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. I was about to close the door, but he shoved his hand against it. Sophia, what exactly do you want? What do I want? I want you disgusting people to stay far away from me. I want you to get out. At that moment, a cool voice came from behind. Mr. Jackson, it's a bit inappropriate to have people blocking my friend's door first thing in the morning, isn't it? Damien had appeared without anyone knowing when. He was wearing only a silk robe, the collar slightly open. His hair was a little damp. He looked just woken. He naturally rested his hand on my shoulder, an intimate gesture. Jackson's gaze instantly turned fierce. He stared fixedly at the hand Damien had placed on my shoulder. Damien? What are you doing here? Why shouldn't I be here? Damien chuckled softly. He looked down at me, his gaze gentle. Baby, these flies are too noisy. Shall I have security show them the door? Baby? I almost burst out laughing. Damien's acting, what a shame if he doesn't win an Oscar. But I played along and leaned into his arms. Sure. Jackson's expression had moved past mere displeasure. He looked as if he might collapse. Sophia, you and him, when did this start? He ground out. When you went to the private observatory with Clara to watch the meteor shower? Or when I covered for you drinking and drank until I had a gastric hemorrhage and ended up in the hospital, and you spent the birthday with her? With every sentence I spoke, Jackson's face paled a little more. These were all things that happened in the past life. I would use these guilty secrets rotting in his gut to cut him to pieces, one knife at a time. He opened his mouth. He couldn't explain anything. Because they were all facts. Jackson's, I lifted my head and stared straight into his eyes. We ended a long time ago. The moment you chose Clara again and again. When I finished speaking, I stopped looking at him. I said to Damien, I'm tired. Damien understood. He put an arm around my shoulders. With a bang, he shut the door. Outside the door, my mother-in-law cursed furiously. Clara's crying. Inside, Damien and I exchanged a smile. Thanks, I said. No need. Damien released my hand and kept his distance. It was just acting. He paused, then added, still, seeing Jackson's face like he'd eaten shit was pretty satisfying. Jackson's didn't bother me again. I knew he wouldn't let it go. He'd only get more paranoid. I stayed at the hotel for 3 days. Damien found me a new apartment. Good location, good security. On moving day, he came to pick me up in person. Any plans for the future? He asked in the car. Get a job, live a decent life. In my previous life, for Jackson's, I gave up my career and willingly became the woman behind him. Thinking back now, it was utterly foolish. We're still short a deputy general manager, interested? Damien offered an enticing proposition. I looked at him, a little surprised. Mr. Damien, we're not related and not friends, there's no need for you to help me like this. I've said it before, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He stared ahead, his tone even. Besides, I admire your abilities. My ability? In my previous life, to help Jackson's go public, I pulled countless all-nighters. The proposals I produced were hailed as classics in the industry. Everyone assumed it was Jackson's achievement. How do you know? I asked. I have my channels. Damien didn't say more. This man was even more unfathomable than I'd imagined. I didn't agree immediately. I only said I'd think about it. Night. I got a call from my mother. Sophia, what on earth is going on between you and Jackson? His mother called me today and said a lot of nasty things, saying you have no shame and are running around with other men. Mom, we broke up. Broken up? How did that happen for no reason? Is there some misunderstanding? Sophia, Jackson is a good kid, don't be willful. In the eyes of all the elders, the Jackson family had a good background, he was handsome and capable, the favored son of heaven. Everyone wanted him as a son-in-law. That I could get engaged to him was me overreaching. In my past life, I thought the same. Mom, whether he's good or not, I know better than you. My voice cooled. Don't interfere in this. I'll handle my own matters. After hanging up, irritation churned in my chest. This was Jackson's tactic. When they couldn't get to me directly, they started going after the people around me. Sure enough. Not long after, my college friend Mia sent a message. Sophia, you have to see this post. I opened the post. The latest one was from Clara. In the photo she sat on a hospital bed in a white dress, and 4 in her arm, her face pale. Fragile and pitiful. Caption, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have made Sophia angry and caused her to fight with Jackson. Now Jackson has stayed awake for days to take care of me, it breaks my heart. The next row of comments were all sympathizing with her and blaming me. Isn't Sophia being vicious? Her fiancé nearly got hurt and she did nothing, then she takes it out on Clara. Exactly, Clara is too kind, that's why she gets bullied. Mr. Jackson is cursed through 8 generations to end up with a fiancé like this. Jackson's is even replying under the post to comfort her, there. I sneered. I tossed my phone aside. Jackson's, you think that's enough to force me to turn back? The next day, I agreed to work at Damien's company. With thunderous measures, I dealt with several long-standing messes. I quickly found my footing in the company. Damien seemed to admire me more and more. We often worked late together, ate together. In the eyes of the company, our relationship was already something extraordinary. That night, we had just finished a video conference. Damien suggested grabbing a drink. Jackson's has been aggressively buying up a small new energy firm lately, he said, swirling his glass as if mentioning it casually. That company was your father's life's work, wasn't it? My hand tightened around the cup. The year I graduated from university, my father's company went bankrupt when its cash flow collapsed. My father fell ill and never recovered because of it. In my previous life, Jackson's did the same thing. He bought my father's company and gave it to me as a present. He begged me to forgive him. He said, Sophia, look, I helped you get back what your father treasured most. From now on, we'll live well together and stop causing trouble. At the time I was utterly moved. I thought he still cared for me. Looking back now, it was just another form of his charity and control. He wants to use this to force me to come back, I said. And what do you think? Damien looked at me. Just a shell company. If he likes it, let him have it. I took a sip of wine, the spicy liquid sliding down my throat. Damien smiled, bold move. We talked a lot. He was very witty. Talking with him was a delight. We left the bar, it was almost midnight. Damien insisted on driving me home. At the apartment building, I was about to get out of the car when he suddenly called after me. Sophia. I turned. He leaned in. Warm breath fanned my ear. I instinctively wanted to pull away, but he only tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Your hair is beautiful. My heart skipped a beat. At that moment, a blinding car light swept over us. A familiar Maybach pulled up beside our car. Jackson stepped out. His face was gloomy. He strode over, flung open the car door, and yanked me out. Sophia, get down here. He gripped my wrist so hard it hurt. Jackson's, what are you doing? I struggled. Damien had also gotten out and stood in front of me, shielding me with his body. Mr. Jackson, show some respect, Damien's voice was icy cold. Respect? You and my fiancé were twisting and tugging in a car in the middle of the night, and you expect me to respect that? Jackson snarled with furious laughter. We're already broken up. I stuck my head out from behind Damien and said coolly. I didn't agree to that. Jackson shouted. His eyes were bloodshot. Sophia, come back with me. Don't make a scene. He tried to grab me again, but Damien blocked him. 2 equally striking men. Facing off beneath the apartment building in the dead of night. Both radiating an overpowering presence. Jackson's, Damien began, Sophia is now my vice president, and she's my friend. I don't want her to be harassed in any way. Your friend? Jackson sneered. Damien, what are you up to? Don't think I don't know. You're just trying to use her against me, aren't you? Mr. Jackson is overthinking, Damien said without changing expression. If I want to deal with you, I don't need to use a woman. That remark clearly hit a nerve with Jackson's. Fine. Jackson's pointed at me and then at Damien. Sophia, just you wait. You'll regret this. He spat out a harsh line, then turned and clambered into the car, speeding away in all haste. The farce had finally come to an end. He won't let this go quietly. Damien watched the direction Jackson's had gone. I know. I rubbed my wrist, reddened where it had been squeezed. Thank you. I'll walk you up. There was a certain hormonal charge in the elevator. At the door, I thanked him again. He suddenly asked, "The thing he just said, does it bother you?" I was stunned for a moment before I realized which line he meant. Using me to deal with him? I smiled. "Mr. Damien, do you think I'm someone who can be that easily used?" He smiled too. "No. But," he paused, his gaze growing intense, "what if I said I actually do want to use you?" I stared at him, saying nothing. "I want to use you," he said, slowly moving closer. "Until our breaths intertwined. Stay by my side." His voice was low, magnetic. My heart raced, uncontrollably pounding. In my past life, every heartbeat belonged to Jackson's alone. And now, this man before me, just a few short sentences, threw me into complete disarray. I didn't know how to react. He only chuckled softly, took a step back. "Good night." He turned and left, leaving me with a rakish silhouette. I leaned against the door and it took me a long time to steady my emotions. Damien, what on earth does he want? In the following days, Jackson's indeed did not appear again. But he announced his presence in another way. News that he had acquired my father's company was splashed across the media. In the reports, he was cast as a passionately devoted, domineering CEO, willing to spend a fortune to win back his lover. And I, naturally, became the spoiled, ungrateful woman. For a time I became the laughingstock of the whole city. My colleagues at the company looked at me differently. All kinds of rumors spread. That day I was in my office handling documents. Mia called. "Sophia, quick, check the trending searches." I opened Instagram. My name was glaringly at the top of the trending list. Sophia, the real-life gold digger. I tapped it and found a long post. Written from the perspective of an insider, it meticulously dug into my rise to the top. It said I came from an ordinary background and climbed onto Jackson's arm with nothing more than a pretty face. It claimed I was insatiable, that while dating Jackson's I'd been cozy with other men on the side. It said I was scheming and cold-blooded, that to force a marriage I'd staged a rescue from a fire scenario. But I'd botched it, injured myself, and then turned around to blame Jackson's. The piece was vivid and detailed, paired with a few blurry photos. One showed me and Damien at the bar's entrance. Another was a side profile of me in the hospital with my head wrapped in bandages. There was one more photo, of Jackson's and me. I was smiling like a blossom, while he wore a blank expression. The post detonated across the internet in an instant. The comments section was unbearable. "Jesus, this woman is disgusting, right? A textbook green tea gold digger. Poor Mr. Jackson, cursed to be tangled up with someone like this. She looks normal enough, so how can she be so vicious inside?" I read those vicious comments and felt cold all over. I knew this was the work of Jackson's and Clara. They wanted to destroy me. In my past life, they ruined my looks and my dignity. In this life, they intend to destroy my reputation and my life. I clenched my phone so tight my knuckles went white. There was a knock on the office door. Damien came in. When he saw my ashen face and the contents on the phone screen, his expression instantly went cold. "Don't look at that." He snatched the phone from my hand. "They did this," I said, my voice trembling. "I know." He came up to me, crouched down, and looked me in the eye. "Sophia, look at me." I lifted my head and met his bottomless eyes. "Trust me," he said, "I can handle this." His voice had a soothing strength. The panic and anger in my heart slowly subsided. I nodded. Okay. I chose to trust him. Damien moved quickly. In less than half a day, the trending post was taken down. That long article was deleted across the entire web. Immediately after, Damien's company's legal department, in my name, sent cease and desist letters to the marketing account that first published the article and to several bloggers who had maliciously spread it. The whole operation was smooth and efficient, swift and decisive. The online atmosphere turned around almost immediately. I told you there'd be a twist, right? It's way too easy to spread rumors these days. Support Sophia's right to defend herself. Make those haters pay. Mr. Damien is so strong. Protecting his wife with power, love it, love it. The nickname Wife Protector made my cheeks flush. After work, Damien asked me out to dinner. The place was a very intimate French restaurant. Thank you. I said it sincerely to him. I told you, I'll take care of it. He cut my steak for me, his movements graceful. I just didn't expect Jackson's to be so despicable. He's not despicable. Damien pushed the sliced steak toward me. He's scared. Scared? He's afraid of losing you. Damien looked up, his gaze burning into me. That's why he'd use such a childish and extreme method, trying to force you back into his arms. I fell silent. Maybe Damien was right. The Jacksons of my past life, so lofty and imperious. He called me and I came, waved me away and I left. Because he was certain, I couldn't live without him. But the Jacksons of this life has lost that certainty. He has become unlike himself. Sophia, Damien suddenly said, do you still love him? I was stunned. Do I still love Jacksons? I had never asked myself that question. In my past life I loved him enough to die for him. That love was etched into my bones. But that love was consumed by that great fire. By that humiliation. By that leap into the void. It was worn away. All that remained was hatred. Overwhelming hatred. I don't love him anymore. I shook my head, my tone firm. From the moment I decided not to enter that inferno, I stopped loving him. Damien smiled, as if he had been relieved. That's good. We had a pleasant dinner. On the way home, I got a call from Mia. Sophia, guess who I ran into today, she said, her voice excited. Who? Clara. She actually tried to bribe me, asking me to set up a meeting with Jackson's for you, to create the illusion that you two were getting back together. I frowned. She also said that if I helped, she'd give me $1 million. And what did you say? I, of course, gave her a mouthful of abuse, and then threw the coffee in her face. Who do you think I am? Mia fumed. I couldn't help laughing. Well done. Of course. But Sophia, don't you think this Clara is kind of odd? When she said those things to me, the look in her eyes, the tone, it's like she knew what would happen in the future. She said Jacksons would finally change their minds, that you and him are meant to be together, and Damien is just a passerby. My heart dropped. Could it be? Clara was reborn too? The thought struck my mind like a bolt of lightning. If she had been reborn too, everything would make sense. Why she always managed to hit my sore spots with pinpoint accuracy. Why she always managed to destroy, with perfect timing, the last warmth between Jackson's and me. Why she went to such lengths to smear me and to set me up with Jackson's. Because she knew that in the past life, although Jackson's was cold toward me, in the end he still chose to get engaged to me. She couldn't accept that. So she came back to life to take everything from me. She wanted Jackson's to belong to her completely and utterly. And the best way was to first turn Jackson's and me into enemies. Then she would appear as a savior, soothe Jackson's, and make him give up on me for good. A clever tactic, yielding to advance. Clara, you really are something. Sophia? Sophia? Are you listening? Mia's voice pulled me back to the present. I'm listening. Are you okay? Why do I feel like something's off with you? I'm fine. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Mia, thank you for telling me this. Hey, we're family. After hanging up, I looked out the window. The night was thick, mirroring my mood. What's wrong? Damien beside me noticed my unease. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell him my suspicion. Damien, if I told you that Jackson's and Clara, like me, were reborn, would you believe it? He froze. Then a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. But he quickly regained his composure. I believe you. His reaction was much calmer than I had expected. Why? Because of you. He looked at me, his gaze serious. You and the rumored Sophia are like night and day. Unless someone has gone through something that completely overturns their life, they wouldn't change this much. I gave a bitter laugh. Yeah, having died once, how could I not be different? He didn't press me about my past life. He reached out and gently covered the back of my hand with his. Don't be afraid. Whatever they want to do, I'll be by your side. His hand was warm, his palm dry. A warmth flowed from the back of his hand straight into my heart. Damien, I looked at him, why are you being so good to me? I had asked this question once before. Last time, he said it was to deal with the Jacksons. This time, he was silent for a long while. So long I thought he wouldn't answer. He finally spoke slowly, his voice low, because, in my last life, I owe you. I jerked my head up, staring at him in disbelief. You. Could it be that he also, that's right. He seemed to see through my thoughts and nodded. I was reborn too. My mind went blank. Jacksons, Clara, Damien. The four of us had all been reborn. What on earth is going on? Does God think my life wasn't chaotic enough already? Last life, at Jackson's engagement banquet, I was there too. Damien's voice pulled me back from my shock. I saw Clara rip off your wig, saw the G family sneer and mock you, saw Jackson's cold indifference. I saw you leave in a daze, and then I followed. I saw you climb to the rooftop, saw you leap. His voice was very soft. Yet like a heavy hammer, it struck my heart hard. So he was there when I died. So besides those taunts and indifference, there was a pair of eyes silently watching me. I tried to save you then, but it was too late. His voice held regret and pain. The moment you fell, I don't know what I was thinking, I jumped after you. I was completely stunned. He actually did that for me. So, when I opened my eyes and returned here, I told myself I could never let you suffer any harm again in this life. He looked at me, his gaze full of abiding love and guilt. Sophia, I'm sorry. In our last life I couldn't save you. This life, let me protect you, okay? Tears burst from my eyes, I could no longer hold them back. I didn't know what to say. I could only nod hard. He pulled me into his arms and held me tight, as if trying to knead me into his very bones. Don't cry, he whispered in my ear, from now on you have me. In his embrace I cried out loud. I cried for the foolishness and grievance of my past life. I cried for the luck and the tenderness of this one. It turned out that, at my most desperate moment, there was still someone willing to throw himself into danger for me. Damien, thank you. Thank you for coming back here too. We learned each other's deepest secrets. The relationship between Damien and me grew closer. We began to date like a real couple. Eating, watching movies. He would remember all my preferences. No cilantro, likes hot Americanos, allergic to mangoes. He would prepare brown sugar water and warming pads in advance when I got my period. He would take me to amusement parks. Accompany me on the carousel I'd always wanted to ride but had no one to go with. These little acts of tenderness were like a warm net, wrapping me tightly. My heart, which had been riddled with wounds because of Jackson's, was also, within that net, gradually being healed. And Jackson's and Clara weren't idle either. Seeing that public opinion attacks didn't work on me, they began a new tactic. Jackson started appearing in my life more and more often. He would stand under my office building holding a large bouquet of roses, waiting for me. He would bribe the security guard at my apartment, sneak upstairs, and knock on my door. He would give me all kinds of expensive gifts. Jewelry, handbags, sports cars. The things I had begged for in my past life and never gotten. Now he offered them with both hands. But I only felt disgust. I told the guard to throw him out. I instructed the front desk to refuse all his deliveries. The gifts he brought, I tossed them intact into the trash. The more he clung to me, the more repulsed I became. And Clara continued to play her understanding, saintly role. She would be the first to appear after Jackson's was rejected by me. She comforted him, accompanied him. She would post suggestive words in her feed. Loving someone is so hard. Watching him be heartbroken over another undeserving woman fills me with pain. It's okay, even if the whole world abandons you, I'll be by your side. Her performance was a success. The Jacksons really seemed touched by her. They began appearing in pairs at all kinds of public events. The media started covering their story too. They said the Jacksons had finally woken up, giving up the gold-digging Sophia and choosing the kind childhood friend Clara. Online, congratulations for them poured in by the thousands. Mia called me furious. Sophia, have you seen it? Jacksons and Clara, their little dog couple, are practically becoming the nation's power couple. It makes me so mad. I was very calm. Fine by me. Let them be locked up, don't go causing trouble for anyone else. Aren't you even a little angry? Why should I be? I'd sooner they hurry up and get married, bind themselves together for life. I truly didn't care anymore. In my world, there was already Damien. The Jacksons were, to me, nothing more than an inconsequential past. That day, Damien took me to a business cocktail party. At the event, we inevitably ran into Jacksons and Clara. Clara linked arms with Jacksons, smiling sweetly. Sophia, long time no see. Yes, I replied, arm in arm with Damien, smiling even more brightly than she did. Seeing you and Mr. Jackson so in love puts my mind at ease. Clara's smile faltered for a moment. Jackson's gaze, however, remained glued to me, unreadably complex. Sophia, he said, his voice hoarse, can we talk alone? No. I refused outright. Damien spoke up too, Mr. Jackson, can't you see Sophia doesn't want to talk to you? Damien, this is between her and me, mind your own business. Jackson's tone was abrupt. What's her business is my business. Damien stood his ground. The atmosphere turned tense in an instant. People around looked over, eager for a show. Seeing this, Clara hurriedly stepped forward to smooth things over. Jackson, forget it, let's go over there and say hello to Mr. Lee. She tried to pull Jackson away, but he didn't move. He stared at me, eyes rimmed with red. Sophia, do you really have to be so heartless? Heartless? I laughed as if I'd just heard the world's biggest joke. Jacksons, what right do you have to talk to me about being heartless? Back then, when your mother was shouting at me and your childhood friend humiliated me in public, where were you? When I was lying in the hospital, my life hanging by a thread, where were you then? He was left speechless by my question. Who is that tender, soulful act of yours supposed to be for? Are you trying to move yourself or to disgust me? His face paled inch by inch. Sophia, I know I was wrong. Give me one more chance, please? He spoke almost in a pleading tone. Watching him in that humble state, I felt not a shred of satisfaction. Only endless desolation. Had I known it would come to this, why begin at all? Jacksons, I said, I gave you chances. When you chose to go to the observatory with Clara, when you chose to spend her birthday with her, when you chose to turn a blind eye to my suffering, you used up every chance then. Now, we owe each other nothing. No, he shook his head, his emotions unraveling, you still owe me a life. In a past life, I pulled you out of a fire. You owe me. I looked at him and suddenly understood something. It turned out this was what had been troubling him all along. He believed I owed him a life. Therefore, it was only natural that I should return to his side. How ridiculous. Jackson's, that life, I repaid it to you the moment I jumped from the 20th floor. His pupils constricted sharply. He looked as if all his strength had been drained away. He staggered back a step. Clara hurriedly caught him. Jackson, are you okay? I stopped looking at them. Arm in arm with Damien, I turned and walked away. Behind us came Jackson's agonized roar. But I didn't look back. Not once. After that party, Jackson seemed to go completely mad. He began to retaliate against Damien and me in ways that bordered on annihilation. He used the G family's connections to crush Damien's company at every turn. He poached our clients, lured away our employees, and spread damaging rumors about the firm. Damien's company plunged into an unprecedented crisis. Shareholders wavered. The stock price kept falling. I knew Jackson's was trying to force Damien to give me up this way. He thought that without Damien's protection I would have nowhere to turn. That I'd be forced back into his arms. He was so naive. I took the initiative and sought out Damien, saying, "Let me handle this." He looked at me, concern in his eyes, but more than that, trust. I mobilized all my contacts and resources and began to fight back. For Jackson's I had once made many connections. I also held many secrets others didn't know. Now, these became my sharpest weapons. I first turned the core executives of Jackson's company. I obtained evidence of their internal financial loopholes and some unsavory transactions. Then I anonymously handed that evidence to the Economic Crimes Unit and the media. One stone sent ripples across 1,000 waves. The G Group was instantly thrust into the eye of the storm. The tax authorities launched an investigation. Partners rushed to terminate contracts. The stock price plummeted. Jackson's was in utter chaos, completely overwhelmed. They no longer had the energy to deal with us. Damien's company crisis was resolved. We won. A clean, decisive victory. Everyone at the celebration was in high spirits. Only Damien looked preoccupied. I pulled him out onto the terrace. "What's wrong? Not happy?" He looked at me, as if about to speak but holding back. "Sophia, have you ever wondered why Jackson suddenly became so unhinged?" I was taken aback for a moment. True. Even if it were revenge, his methods were excessively extreme. It was like injuring 1,000 enemies while harming 800 of your own. Nothing like something a rational businessman would do. "He seems afraid of something," Damien said, "or rather, he's racing against something." Race against time? A bad feeling suddenly rose in my chest. At that moment my phone rang. It was Mia. Her voice was choked with tears. "Sophia. It's bad. You have to come. Clara, she kidnapped your mother." My brain went buzz and blank. "Clara, how dare she? What did she say?" My voice was trembling. She said to make you go alone to the abandoned factory in the west of town. Use yourself to trade for your mother. She also said," Mia sobbed, "she said this is what you owe her. She wants you to taste the suffering she went through in her past life." In my previous life, a terrifying thought formed in my mind. In my previous life, how did Clara die? I never cared. All I knew was that after I died Jackson's was inconsolable. And then, what happened next? My memory stopped abruptly at the moment I jumped from the building. "Sophia," Damien took my cold hand, "don't be afraid, I'll go with you." "No," I shook my head, "she made me go alone. I can't let you go on this dangerous mission alone." "Damien," I looked at him, my gaze steady, "this is a grudge between her and me. It has to be settled by my own hand. And," I drew a deep breath, "I have a feeling. Tonight everything will come to an end." An abandoned factory. Dark and damp. The smell of rust and dust hung in the air. I walked in alone. In the center of the factory my mother sat tied to a chair, a cloth shoved in her mouth. Her face was full of terror. Clara stood beside her. A dagger in her hand. Pressed against my mother's throat. She saw me smile. The smile was manic and contorted. "Sophia, you're finally here. Let my mother go." I said coldly. "Let her go?" "Sure." Clara tapped my mother's cheek with the spine of the dagger. "Kneel and beg me." I looked into my mother's teary eyes. Without hesitation I dropped to my knees. I beg you, let her go. Ha ha ha. Clara laughed loudly. Tears of laughter spilled from her eyes. Sophia, you finally have your day. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this? In my last life, you stole my Jackson. In this life, I was reborn and swore I'd make you pay blood for blood. I'll make sure everyone turns against you, I'll ruin your reputation. I'll make you taste what it's like to have nothing. Her emotions ran high. With a dagger in her hand she scored a shallow cut across my mother's neck. My mother let out a muffled groan of pain. My heart ached as if pricked by needles. Clara. What on earth do you think you're doing? What do I want? She put away her smile, her eyes full of malice. I want you dead. I want to tie you here, just like in my last life, and burn you alive. Burned alive? I froze. What do you mean? You still don't know? She smiled eerily. In my last life, after you jumped from the upstairs, Jackson went mad. He thought I had killed you, so he tied me here and set a fire, wanting me to die with you. He set this place on fire with his own hands, then stood outside, watching me coldly as I struggled in the flames, screaming, finally turning to ash. He said, "This is what I owe you." I stared at her in shock. I couldn't utter a single word. So that's how the last life ended. Jackson's, he actually. So, Clara's eyes grew wild and obsessive. This time I've come back. I'm going to make him make the same choice again. She said that and took out her phone, dialing a number. It was Jackson's. Jackson, her voice instantly turned fragile and helpless, save me. Sophia and I have been kidnapped, at the abandoned factory in the west of town, they're going to burn us alive. She hung up, looking at me with triumph. Sophia, tell me, who do you think he'll come to save this time? I said nothing. Because I already knew the answer. Before long, the factory gate was kicked open. Jackson rushed in. He froze at the scene before him. Jackson! Clara cried. Jackson's gaze flicked between me, my mother, and Clara. Pain and torment unlike anything before showed on his face. Jackson's, Clara cried, come save me. It's going to explode any second. As she spoke, she pressed a button on the remote in her hand. A ticking sound spread around the factory. It was a time bomb. Jackson's, I finally said, my voice eerily calm, you need to leave. He stared at me sharply. Take my mom and go. This has nothing to do with you. No, he snarled. Sophia, I'm not leaving. Jackson. Clara screamed. Get over here. Have you forgotten how you treated me in your last life? You promised you'd make it up to me this time. Jackson's body trembled violently. He looked at Clara, then at me. Bloodshot veins stood out in his eyes. Choose. Clara screamed hysterically. Jackson's, choose. Today there are only the two of us, you can only take one. Time ticked away, second by second. The ticking grew more frantic. Sweat poured down Jackson's face like rain. He watched my lips move, as if trying to say something. But at that moment, another door of the factory was kicked open from the outside. Damien burst in with a large group of people. Sophia. The instant he saw me, his gaze hardened into something fierce. His men quickly subdued the crazed Clara and freed my mother. He, meanwhile, rushed to my side and wrapped me tightly in his arms. It's okay, it's okay. He kept comforting me. I leaned against him and looked over, not far away, at the man who looked utterly shattered, as if the whole world had abandoned him, Jackson's. In the end he still didn't make a choice. Or rather, the moment he hesitated he had already chosen. He chose to give up. He gave up on me. He gave up on Clara. The bomb was defused. Clara was taken away by the police. A farce, finally over. I looked at Jackson's. He stood there alone. Like a solitary statue. Damien put an arm around my shoulder and said softly, "Let's go." I nodded. As I turned, I heard Jackson's behind me. In a voice almost desperate, he called my name. I did not look back. Jackson's, goodbye. No, never to meet again. Jackson's and I never saw each other again. I heard that the G family conglomerate, accused of tax evasion and unfair competition, was hit with massive fines and left severely weakened. Jackson's was also investigated on suspicion of intentional harm. His life was utterly ruined. As for me, at Damien Corporation, I thrived. Together we propelled the company to a new height. 1 year later, Damien proposed to me. He dropped to one knee and produced a ring woven from foxtail grass. "Sophia," he said, looking at me with sincere, ardent eyes, "in my last life I missed you. In this life, I don't want to miss you again. Will you marry me?" I smiled and let the tears fall. "Okay,